cafeteria? Do we need to recognize that English is the only language, or do we need to say that we will, we like differences in the workforce in terms of language, because sometimes as we're working with people throughout the world, having people that speak a different language is going to be in sync with what our customers are. So we want to look more like our customers so we can be a better customer to them. Do we have different work schedule differences? Can people work from home? Can they start at different times? Do we have schedules where instead of a 5-day work week, we're on 4 or 3 days and then off so much? So we need to look at differences that may make people more productive as we move forward in our workforces of the future. We know that technology is a big key to the future of any workforce today, because technology is really in every business out there today. And again, information, there's a lot of portable mobile applications that people can use, and this is just bringing more information into our workforce. Social media availability and the increasing complexity of intellectual capital are ramping up the needs to make sure that we are establishing policies and procedures so that we are making sure that we are protecting our intellectual capital, because now, used to when the Internet first came out, people could get to the Internet in their workplaces. And then workplaces started to curb a bit of that, just because people needed to be focused on their work and not so much going to Internet sites that either weren't business appropriate or that didn't have anything to do with the business setting. So we need to just curb some of that. But with smartphones now and people having the ability to access the Internet on their own and not use any employer devices, what do we as a business need to think about in terms of that availability? So are we going to restrict people bringing their phones into the office, their own personal cell phones? Are we going to restrict times that they can use them? We need to think about that going forward, because we as an employer are not going to have the control to the Internet that we may have had up until this point before smartphones became something that a lot of people have today. In terms of recruiting going forward, we see a lot of recruiters using Facebook and LinkedIn and other networking sites that really allow non-traditional information. But is this going to create ethical dilemmas for those of us in the workforce that do recruiting? Are we going to have access to personal information that we may not have had before? And if so, how are we going to use that? The fact that we can see pictures of people that may be on LinkedIn or Facebook as we're recruiting, is that going to subconsciously or unconsciously impact how we look at somebody's resume, where previously we didn't have the visual image of that person? We think of privacy issues. A lot of times when people go out there and apply for a job, they're asked to fill out an application. Some of those applications have very, very private information. I've seen some with asking for Social Security numbers. I've seen things asking for driver's license numbers. And this is even before somebody has been qualified as a candidate for a particular job. I question whether we as employers need to be collecting that type of information at that point, mainly due to the privacy issues. Because once we as employers collect that information, now we've got to know what to do with it and how to protect it. So I think as we look at possibly our employment or recruiting activities going forward, we really need to think through that process and think through what kind of information we are collecting from people on the very, very front end, and think, do we really need as much of that information as early in the process as we're getting it, or do we need to kind of step back and say, maybe some of this information that we're connecting, we only need to get it from a smaller slice of our applicant pool going forward. Because again, once we collect it, we are really responsible for making sure that it is shepherded appropriately and that that we take care of protecting that information. So when we look at what's going on in the workforce going forward, again, as we talked about earlier, employment is at an all-time high. And we know our workforces are shrinking somewhat because the needs just aren't there for as many employees now as they were, say, a few years ago. But we also know that that's going to rebound, that eventually the economy is going to start to turn and we're going to have many more opportunities to hire and rehire people. But you know what? Today we kind of have a soured workforce because a lot of people have really, when they've come out of the workforce from being downsized or right-sized, they're a bit soured from the process. So we have to look right now going forward, how are we going to attract those people back into the workforce? And I think we need to think about some of our practices now so that the people that are retained and remain there have a positive experience going forward so that they can be some of our best advocates for bringing people into the workforce and bringing people back. And I think one way we can do that really is to concentrate on honest communication skills. You know, sometimes good news isn't, or the honest news isn't always good, but at least people know that they can trust the information that we get from us. And so we need to think about what messages that we are giving out to people and how we can best communicate information going forward so people feel empowered, so they feel like they are knowledgeable about what's going on. And to that, one of the last things I want to touch on today are these soft skills. And even though we are technologically becoming a more technologically driven workforce, nothing will ever replace the soft skills that are so critical to a business success, from teaching supervisors and managers how to supervise people, to teaching supervisors and managers performance management, to teaching supervisors and managers how to communicate when somebody isn't doing as good a job, isn't meeting expectations in a way that encourages them to do better, that motivates them to change their behaviors, to deliver on a more positive way. So in a lot of businesses that I see today, some of these soft skills are skills that are not very crisp and need some enhancement so that we can make sure that we're communicating and so that the vision that we have for all of our businesses is getting accomplished in a way that motivates people to stay with us and motivates people to do their best. So those were the topics that I wanted to kind of discuss with you about today in terms of what's going on in our workforces today and how we need to take some of these topics, some of these elements, and shape our businesses going forward in terms of recruitment and training and technology, and just thinking about our workforces today and how we can mold them to be the workforce of the future.